Our Chris Van Cleve is in Charlotte and was in attendance at the press conference. So, Chris, it certainly seemed, again, a second day of questions regarding both what exactly happened regarding the shooting of Keith Scott and when and how definitive proof, perhaps video footage, might be provided to the community in an effort to quell what was, again, a second night of protest last night, as well as questions about why the city seemed rather unprepared for what did transpire last night.
Yeah, you know, Josh, a lot of questions, and sometimes the logic was hard to follow. You heard the police chief say at one point, you know, we only are going to release something if there are extenuating circumstances. You would think that 2 nights of unrest would fall into the extenuating circumstances category, but then the chief doubling down that you're not going to see this video. He then described sort of what he has seen on this video, which is that he doesn't see definitively Mr. Scott pointing a gun and threatening the officers, but he says the video taken in the totality of what they know leads them in that direction. But again, he reinforced that we're not going to see this video released publicly, although the family has requested to see it, and he says that will happen. That could happen as early as today, but the chief and his staff were not able to say when that would happen. We know the mayor hasn't seen the video because she told us that earlier this morning, that she hasn't seen the video, which I think is also sort of surprising when you're also making statements like the city is open for business and trying to quell unrest when you can't really articulate what happened in this shooting. Also, the police chief said they are looking at the possibility that the person who was shot last night may have been shot by a police officer. They said there have been some reports of that. They don't know if that happened. They don't know that it didn't happen. So they're looking into that. There was really more questions raised than there were answers given today. We do know that the National Guard and the state police will be here on duty tonight. While there is the ability to declare a curfew, there has not been a curfew declared. That the National Guard and the state police will be focused on protecting infrastructure and buildings and property. There was a significant amount of looting, the chief said last night, so you'll see the National Guard and the state police work to protect transit as well as businesses, and the police will then focus on going after lawbreakers. They said 44 arrests last night, 9 civilians injured. There's video that we've not been able to independently verify, but with video from what certainly appears to be last night, where people were being beaten up and attacked. And there are reports of people being attacked in their cars. This was a scary situation last night, and the answer appears to be that the National Guard will be there, the state police will be there, and the police will be out in even more force tonight, targeting these lawbreakers while pushing for people to protest peacefully. Although, at the same time, at the heart of this incident, Josh, is this video that the chief says we're never going to see.
So let's get to the video first, and then ostensibly what perhaps the city should have been prepared for last night, because some of these responses with regard to what did transpire last night are a bit mind-boggling, if you will. But again, with regard to the video, in fact, the chief at one point, when asked about how he squares the idea of transparency with the notion that he does not believe that releasing the video apparently would either quell potential violence further or would not in any way be something that wouldn't compromise the integrity of an ongoing investigation. He actually, again, used this phrase, well, transparency is in the eye of the beholder. It is a very interesting stance to take, as you mentioned, when he did speak as specifically as he has in the last 2 days to what he saw in the video. He actually, again, confirmed that he cannot see any specific pointing of a gun by Keith Scott. We should also mention, for context at this point, other eyewitness accounts say that Scott merely had a book spill from his car and that at no time did he brandish a gun. Obviously, there are questions. It would seem that at this point, it would be inconceivable that the police chief of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police had not seen all available video and certainly could conclusively speak to whether or not that gun was brandished by the deceased.
So what he didn't say whether or not Scott had a gun or not. We know that police have said that a gun was recovered at the scene. What he did say about the video is he doesn't see conclusive evidence where a gun is brandished at officers or officers were threatened with a gun. I think he chose those words fairly carefully. So we don't know if we ever see him holding a gun or not, because the chief hasn't been clear on that. Now, when asked directly by media that's citing somebody who had seen the video that there may have been a reference or threat with a gun, he said, well, we'll talk about that later. So, transparency in the eye of the beholder, I think transparency is one of those words that has, kind of a clear definition, but we're not getting as a clear answer.
Well, and again, you mentioned you did speak to the mayor, who, at least as of this morning, had not seen the video. Just in watching that interview, I know I was rather stunned by that admission. We had an officer on earlier today who thought that, frankly, the police's handling of this, as it regards the decision to not release the video, is one that is absolutely hampering the healing that could be happening, or certainly the quelling of violence there. And so let's also speak then to what we saw. And we're seeing images last night, very disturbing and frankly all too familiar in this country. Another city beset by violent protest. It seems as though the police chief, at least with regard to the way he told it, it seems as though authorities were somehow taken surprise by what eventually happened last night, which seems to really boggle the mind, considering what had happened the night previous.
Josh, there was an interesting moment when the mayor was asked about why she didn't ask for the National Guard sooner, and I asked her that this morning. You can see the police chief nodding along with that question, that resources were offered earlier in the day and they weren't taken. I think there is a question, a real legitimate question: did the city wait too long to ask for help? We know we have seen situations in Baltimore and Ferguson where the National Guard was brought in. I was in both of those cities as the Guard rolled in, and it does change the dynamic. It is a different conversation when you take the local police out of the mix, and now it's National Guardsmen that are doing the security. The reaction from demonstrators just was different in both of those cities. Situations certainly remained tense, particularly in Ferguson, but it did change the dynamic some. And so you do wonder if today the message was that maybe they waited too long for that. But they knew people were angry, and it did start peacefully yesterday. These started as peaceful demonstrations. As the night grew on, the situation became more tense and got out of hand. And once you've sort of committed your resources, this is what you have. These are the resources you have. And there were a lot of police out there, but there were also large groups of people moving in many directions. And in order to keep officers safe, it is a difficult situation. There is no question, but it is one that certainly did not go the way the police and the mayor had hoped last night. And I think there's a good deal of concern what that means for tonight. And many of the major businesses here in downtown, in uptown Charlotte, told people not to come into work today out of an abundance of caution. So there is concern, I think, from people as to what happens now.
In answering that question, the mayor did also seem to look to place some blame, frankly, or at least to have blame shared by her advisors, whom she invoked several times in that answer, even as the mayor was also essentially saying, hey, the uptown area of Charlotte is open for business. And so as we look ahead then, and you just mentioned, there's the old saw, Chris, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. They, at this point, again, have not committed to a curfew tonight. There seemed to be some shock and dismay on behalf of the assembled press corps there as the police chief spoke to that. He did say that there are now resources in place to be more proactive. Do we have any specific idea of which he speaks?
Well, so we know that the National Guard and the state police are coming in. And what that means is you can have the National Guard and the state police take up some of the secondary duties that the police were also doing last night. That frees up more officers to respond when there are reports of looting or violence or blocking of a roadway, and that then, it's a force multiplier. And while cities are hesitant to bring in the National Guard because that also sends a message about force, and there's a lot of talk about militarizing of police departments. Literally, bringing in the military can change that dynamic. As you can see, there are some folks here from the community that also were not terribly satisfied with the answers they got today here. So to answer your question, resources. National Guard, state police are going to help with traffic control. They're going to be focused on infrastructure and businesses and buildings, protecting those things. That frees up the police to be crowd control, to respond to emergency situations. If violence happens, to be able to respond quickly to that. But it is definitely an open question if things calm down tonight or if they escalate. It's been raining on and off today. If it stays cold and rainy, that actually could work in favor of a calmer night. But it's anyone's question right now. Certainly when you see armored Humvees and soldiers in the streets, it does change the conversation some, and that may have an impact. But there are a lot of people that say just release this video so people have an idea what really happened, and that video is not being released.
Yep, it seems very certain that will not be seen anytime soon. Chris Van Cleve there in Charlotte for us. I know you'll be with us all day here on CBSN, and do stay safe, my friend. Stay safe.
Sure thing. Thank you, Josh.